This week, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung attended the G7 summit in Canada, his first overseas trip since taking office. To walk us through the key takeaways from his 3-day visit, our presidential office correspondent Song Yujin joins us in the studio today. Welcome, Yujin.
Great to be here, Sujin.
So, Yujin, let's begin with the significance of this trip. There was uncertainty at first whether President Lee Jae-myung will attend at all.
That's right, Sujin. There were a lot of questions about President Lee's attendance because this trip came just 12 days after he took office, making this the fastest overseas debut by any South Korean president. Now, for comparison, it took former President Yoon Suk-yeol 49 days, Moon Jae-in 51 days, and Park Geun-hye 70 days. But despite the tight timeline, President Lee at the end did make the decision to attend. So here's what he told reporters aboard the Air Force One.
국제사회에 대한민국이 신속하게 정상화됐다는 것을 좀 보여주는 게 필요하다라는 의견도 있었고, 또 앞으로는 우리가 국제사회가 협력할 분야가 상당히 많은데 좀 무리하더라도 일찍 접촉하는 게 낫겠다는 의견들이 많아서.
As many of our viewers may know, South Korea experienced a period of stalled diplomacy for about 6 months after former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law debacle last December.
So it was certainly a meaningful debut, so let's turn to the results. So while he delivered remarks at the G7's expanded session, much attention was on his bilateral meetings. So let's start with Tuesday's summit with Japan.
Sure, that was indeed the highlight and one of the most anticipated meetings for President Lee's trip, especially after a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump fell through after the American leader returned to Washington early due to what was going on in the Middle East. However, President Lee did meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, marking their very first summit.
우리나라에서는 일본과 한국과의 관계를 가깝고도 먼 나라라고 호칭합니다. 마치 한마당을 같이 쓰는 이웃집처럼 우리는 뗄래야 뗄 수 없는 관계였습니다. 오늘을 계기로 한국과 일본이 미래지향적으로 좀 더 나은 관계로 발전하기를 진심으로 기대합니다.
I truly hope that marking the 60th anniversary of normalized diplomatic ties, exchanges will grow not just between our two governments and businesses, but also between our people. I look forward to Korea and Japan working together in a way that contributes more to the region and to the world.
So during this 30-minute meeting, the two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to regular summit-level meetings while agreeing to strengthen trilateral coordination with the United States, now particularly in responding to regional geopolitical challenges, including North Korea. Also, a senior presidential office official told reporters the talks were held in a positive, friendly atmosphere, and both leaders expressed interest in frequent reciprocal visits.
So aside from Japan, President Lee also met with other world leaders during his trip.
You're right. So President Lee did hold a flurry of bilateral meetings. So throughout his trip, he held one-on-ones with 9 other heads of state, plus UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Now, among the G7 members, he met with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney.
The leaders of South Korea and the UK agreed to move forward on updating their post-Brexit FTA. They also discussed working together on Korean Peninsula, peace and security.
So in his summit with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, Lee emphasized defense cooperation, especially mentioning the participation of Korean companies in Canada's submarine acquisition program, with contracts expected to be finalized by 2028. President Lee also held summits with the leaders of South Africa, Australia, Brazil, Mexico, India, and the European Union, where economic cooperation was high on the agenda. Now, throughout all these bilateral meetings, the presidential office says President Lee prioritized building personal rapport and pragmatic diplomacy.
President Lee engaged comfortably with all the leaders, drawing on his prior knowledge of their personal backgrounds, political careers, and governing philosophies, while also using his trademark humor to build rapport.
In virtually every bilateral meeting, there were focused discussions on advancing practical cooperation in areas like trade, investment, supply chains, and energy, aimed at delivering real benefits for the Korean economy and businesses.
Right, so beyond the bilateral meetings, President Lee also delivered remarks at the G7's expanded session. What were the key takeaways there?
Right, so the expanded session President Lee participated in, the theme was energy security, where the president delivered 2 speeches. In his first address, he outlined South Korea's commitment to strengthening the global energy supply chain, which he described as being key to global economic growth and prosperity. And in his second speech, the president shared the country's policy direction on integrating AI and energy. He also detailed plans to boost energy efficiency through low-power AI semiconductors, known as NPUs, and to encourage greater private sector involvement through tax incentives, regulatory reform, and the creation of a public investment fund. President Lee also invited global leaders to take part in the APEC summit in Gyeongju later this year, where South Korea will present a roadmap for international cooperation on AI.
Right, so this seems like a very strong start, but there's still a major task left, a meeting with President Trump. Do you have any updates on when this might happen?
Well, that is indeed the big question, because the canceled summit with U.S. President Donald Trump initially drew a lot of attention, especially with 25% reciprocal tariffs set to take effect if South Korea fails to reach a deal with the United States by July 8th. Now, according to a senior top office official, talks are ongoing to arrange a meeting at another multilateral engagement. And one possibility is the upcoming NATO summit.
So we will be watching that closely. Thank you so much for the wrap up today, Eugene.
Always a pleasure.